My name is Nora Callahan. I am 34 years old. And the night my mother decided to celebrate getting rid of me, she did it with flower arrangements. Not fake ones. Real ones. Sunflowers and white leaves from the forest on Beaumont. The same florist she used for my Aunt Patricia's retirement party. The same florist she called every Easter Sunday, without fail. She had them placed on the dining room table, on the kitchen island, and on the little credenza by the front door. The one I refinished with my own hands during a February ice storm 2 winters before because she said it looked tired, and I didn't want her spending money on a new one. There were 17 people in that house when I pulled up. 17. I counted them through the window before I walked in. Not because I was scared. Because when your mother throws a party to celebrate your departure from the home you have been quietly holding together for 4 years, you need a second to prepare yourself. You need to breathe. You need to count something concrete, so the world stays solid beneath you. The door was unlocked because it's always unlocked when company comes. My mother believes locked doors are inhospitable. That was the word she used, hospitable. Even after the break-in on Sycamore Street 3 blocks over, even after I put a deadbolt on the garage side door, and she had it removed by the landlord, who happened to be her cousin Gerald, within 48 hours. I walked in holding a cardboard box with the last of my things. A coffee mug, 2 framed photos, a charging cable, a spare pair of shoes. 4 years of my life in a box that weighed 11 pounds. I know the weight because I stepped on the bathroom scale with it, and without it before I left, because that is the kind of woman I am. Someone who measured things. Someone who kept receipts. The conversation stopped the way conversations stop when the wrong person walks into the right room. My Aunt Patricia was there. Her husband, Glenn, who hadn't worked a full-time job since the Bush administration and who had opinions about everything and knowledge of nothing. My cousin Bethany, who was 22 and had just moved back from Tampa, and was so even though her mother drove to Tampa, packed her apartment, and drove her back in a rented van. My mother's neighbor, Claudette. My mother's church friend, Diane, who ran a blog about Christian household management and had once written a post about the spiritual dangers of adult children who refused to launch. 2 of my mother's former co-workers from the school district. And my brother, Marcus. Marcus was the one who finally spoke. Nora, he said, like my name, and my mother turned to the kitchen, and she was wearing the blue dress. The good one. The one she saves for weddings and funerals and Sunday services when she wants people to see her at her most composed. She had her hair done. She was smiling. Not the nervous smile. The real one. There she is, she said. Come in, baby. Come say your goodbyes. Goodbyes. Like I was the one who had planned. Like I packed my box joyfully and skipped out the door. Like the last 6 months of quiet deterioration. The pointed comments at dinner, the passive requests through Marcus about my timeline. The Sunday morning, she slid a folded piece of notebook paper under my bedroom door with a date circled in red ink and the words "the house needs to breathe" written above it. Like none of that had happened. Like I had simply decided one morning to go. Diane started first. She said something about choosing to play, and how sometimes the people who love us most have to push us. Glenn laughed and said something to Marcus about how you can't help somebody who won't help themselves. My Aunt Patricia looked at me with a kind of sympathy that is indistinguishable from pity until you realize she had been helping spread the story for months. And Bethany, sweet, freshly rescued Bethany, said nothing but looked at the floor, which told me she had heard enough to be ashamed on my behalf. Claudette said, quietly, for years is a long time to carry something. For years. I set the box down on the credenza, right beside the sunflowers. And I looked at the room. Really looked at it. At the walls I had repainted in the spring of my 2nd year there, because the moisture damage from the slow leak in the upstairs bathroom had turned the dining room into something that looked like a wound. At the floors, I had refinished. At the trim work around the front windows, I had caulked after Marcus finished the drops were running her fill up in November. At the chandelier, I had rewired after the electrician quoted her $900, and she cried about it for 2 days. I looked at every single thing I had built, fixed, paid for, or quietly held in place. Then I took out my phone and took a photo of all of them standing there. My mother, in her blue dress, with her sunflowers and her 17 guests, all of them celebrating the end of
in my head again. You had your heart set on me,
kept the house
but
from
these
falling
feels
down
they come
around
and
me.
go.
My mother saw me do it and smiled wider. She thought I was taking a memory. I left without a word. 11 days later, my brother Marcus called me 8 times before noon. Before I tell you what he said, and I will tell you everything, I want to ask you something. What time is it where you are? Where are you watching this from? Because I want to know how far a woman's truth can travel.
Messing with my
She
head
finally
again.
decides to
You
stop
had your
being
heart
quiet.
set on
Let me back
me,
up, because
but
none of
these
this starts
feels they
with
come and go.
It starts 4 years earlier, on a Tuesday in November, when I drove home to Dayton, Ohio, from Columbus with a suitcase, a laptop, and a reason I hadn't told anyone yet. My name is Nora Callahan. At 30 years old, I had a master's degree in healthcare administration, a salary that looked good on paper but evaporated fast in a city with Columbus rents, and a mother named
Messing with
Renata
my head
Callahan, who had just been
again. You had
diagnosed
your
with
heart
type 2
set on
diabetes,
me,
early-stage
but these
hypertension,
feels they
and
come
something
and
the
go.
cardiologist called
And
a pattern of decisions that will become a crisis if the pattern continues. I sat in that cardiologist's waiting room while my mother was in with the doctor, and I read the same paragraph in a wellness magazine 14 times without absorbing a single word. I was doing the math that every eldest daughter who was raised to be responsible before she was old enough to have responsibilities does instinctively.
messing with my head
I was
again.
calculating
You
what it
had
would
your heart
cost to let
set
things continue
on
as they were
me,
versus what it would
but these
cost to
feels
separate.
they come
I
and
had a
go.
lease.
And
A good job with a hospital system doing vendor contract management and operational compliance reviews. A life that was small but mine. A studio apartment with a window box where I was trying, badly, to grow basil. I gave it all up in a weekend. Not dramatically. Not with speeches. I put in my notice at the hospital, told my landlord I would
messing with my head again.
the basil
You had your heart
getting water
set
during
on me,
chaos.
but
I
these
told my
feels they
mother I
come
was
and
coming back
go.
temporarily
And
to help her get stabilized. She cried with relief. She said she knew she could count on me. She said God always sends help. She was right about that last part. She just had a habit of forgetting who God sent. My mother's financial situation was not what she had let on. She had been retired from the Dayton School District for 3 years by then, pulling a pension that was
messing
enough
with
for
my
a
head
single woman
again.
living alone.
You had your heart
Barely
set
enough to
on
fund
me,
what it was not
but
enough
these
for
feels
the
they come and
lifestyle
go.
she had quietly
And
resumed after my father left. Not a wild lifestyle, not reckless spending, just the slow and stubborn refusal to let the size of the life shrink to match the size of the income. She still went to the salon every 2 weeks. She still kept cable. She still bought cuts of meat that required a conversation with the butcher. She still sent birthday cards with money
messing
inside
with my head again. You had your heart set
especially
on me,
financial ones,
but these
were a
feels
kind
they
of armor
come
she had
and
worn
go.
so long
And
she had forgotten there was a body underneath. When I got there and started going through the household finances at her request, I want to be clear about that. She handed me a shoebox full of paper and said, "Nora, I can't make heads or tails of it." What I found was not catastrophic. It was something worse. It was a slow bleed, a collection of small leaks, none of them individually fatal.
messing with my
All of them
head again.
combined.
You had your heart set
She
on
owed
me,
$3,700
but these
on the
feels they
medical
come
bill
and
2
go.
years prior that
And
had been sent to collections without her noticing. She had a home equity line of credit she'd taken out during a roof repair that she was paying interest only on and had not touched the principal. She had a car payment on a vehicle that was 11 years old and worth less than what she still owed on it. She had a life insurance policy she was no longer sure she understood and had been overpaying for
messing with
premium
my head
riders
again.
couldn't
You
explain.
had your heart
And she
set
had 3
on
separate
me,
subscription services
but
she had
these feels
forgotten
they
she
come
subscribed
and
to,
go.
including a
And
meal kit delivery she had signed up for once during a promotion and never used, and somehow never canceled despite the charges appearing on her bank statement every single month for 14 months. I didn't judge her. I sat at that kitchen table on a Thursday evening with every piece of paper spread out in front of me, and I said, "Okay, let's fix this. We start here." And we did.
messing with my
I
head
negotiated the
again.
medical
You
debt
had your
down
heart
to
set
$1,100,
on
set up a
me,
payment schedule.
but these
I
feels
called
they
the home
come and
equity
go.
lender and
And
restructured the payoff timeline. I called the insurance company and had an agent walk me through her policy line by line until we stripped it to what she actually needed, which cut her premium by $62 a month. I called the car lender and got a 6-month hardship deferral while we figured out whether a refinance made sense. And I canceled the meal kit, the streaming service,
Messing with my head again.
with the
You
other
had your
streaming
heart
service,
set
and the
on
credit
me.
monitoring subscription.
But these
She didn't
feels,
remember
they
signing.
come and go.
In 3 weeks, I had cut her monthly obligations by almost $320. My mother told Aunt Patricia I was home helping her organize. Organizing. Like I had come home to alphabetize her spice cabinet. I didn't correct her. It was the first time I let the story slide. It would not be the last. Marcus came home about 6 months after I did. This is
Messing
the
with my
part one
head
you need to
again.
understand.
You had your heart
The
set
story gets
on
easier to
me.
just read here.
But these
You're not
feels, they
paying
come and go.
Marcus,
And
who's 4 years younger than me. He's 30 now, was 26 when he came back. He had been working in sales in Atlanta, working hard by his own accounting, though the sales numbers he described shifted every time he told the story, and the name of the company seemed to change depending on who was asking. He came home because, as he put it, the market was brutal and he needed to reset. My mother was thrilled.
messing with my
She
head
made his
again.
favorite meal.
You had your heart
She put fresh
set
towels in
on
the bathroom
me.
he'd use.
But these
She
feels,
told
they come
Claudette
and
that Marcus was
go.
home
And
because he had the good sense to know when a man needs to step back and take stock. Nobody used the word freeloader for Marcus. Not once. Not even when his reset lasted 11 months and eventually turned into a permanent relocation that everyone stopped calling temporary around month 7. Marcus did not touch the finances. Marcus did not repaint walls or recaulk
messing with
windows
my head
or spend
again.
40
You
minutes
had your
on
heart
the phone with a
set
creditor explaining
on
the terms
me.
of hardship
But
policy.
these feels, they
Marcus
come
watched
and go.
television, went to
And
the gym, met friends for dinner, and told people at those dinners that he was consulting, which was true in the same way that my mother organizing was true. He was not cruel to me. I want to say that plainly. He was not like the men in these stories who take and mock and sneer. Marcus was something almost harder to name. He was comfortable. He had simply always existed in a world where the
messing
labor
with my
around him got
head
done by
again.
someone else.
You had your heart
And
set
he had never once
on
been asked to
me.
look at who that
But
someone
these
else
feels,
was.
they come
He
and
said my
go.
name like a
And
mild inconvenience because I was the inconvenience of accountability in a house that had agreed, without ever discussing it, to be comfortable. By year 2, I was managing more than the money. My mother's health required more coordination than I had anticipated. The diabetes was manageable but demanding. She needed consistent meals, consistent medication,
messing with
consistent
my head
monitoring from
again.
the cardiologist,
You had your heart set
blood pressure,
on
blood
me.
glucose, cholesterol,
But these feels,
all
they
of which
come and
required the kind
go.
of daily
And
vigilance that looks invisible from the outside and feels like a full-time job from the inside. I drove her to appointments. I tracked her labs in a spreadsheet. I learned the difference between her 2 blood pressure medications and why she couldn't take them simultaneously. I called her pharmacy when they filled one prescription incorrectly 2 months in a row. I sat
messing
with
with
her
my head
cardiologist on a
again.
video call
You had your heart
and took
set
notes because
on
she forgot
me.
things she heard in
But these
clinical
feels,
settings
they come
and
and
felt
go.
humiliated by
And
the forgetting. I did not have a medical background. I built one, piece by piece, the way eldest daughters learn to do. Not because someone taught them, but because there is no one else, and the alternative is watching something you love fall apart. I was also still working. This is the part the Claudettes and Dianes of the world have the most trouble accepting because it doesn't fit the story they like to tell
messing
about
with my
women.
head again.
I had
You
to
had
build
your
my
heart
freelance
set
work
on
remotely,
me.
healthcare compliance
But these
consulting,
feels,
vendor
they come
contract
and
auditing,
go.
documentation review for mid-sized medical practices, and regional health networks. I worked early in the morning before my mother woke and late at night after she slept. I took calls in my car in the driveway because the house had only one space with reliable silence, the bathroom, and I could not conduct client calls from a bathroom. I made good money, not extraordinary money,
Messing
good
with my
money,
head
enough
again.
to cover
You
my
had your
personal
heart
expenses
set
without taking
on
anything
me.
from my mother
But
and
these feels, they
on
come
certain
and
months
go.
to cover
And
more than my personal expenses. I paid her electric bill in full for 8 months running when her pension had a disbursement error that took 5 months to resolve and another 3 months to fully recoup. I paid her car insurance twice when the auto pay failed and the renewal date hit the week before her check posted. I bought groceries. Real groceries, not
messing with my
supplemental
head
groceries.
again.
Full
You had your
substitute
heart
for a household
set
of 3
on me.
because Marcus
But
ate
these
here
feels,
too,
they come
though
and
Marcus
go.
seemed to believe
And
food simply appeared. I am not telling you this because I want credit. I gave up wanting credit sometime in the middle of year 2 when I realized it was never coming, and the waiting for it was costing me something I couldn't afford to spend. I'm telling you because the story my family eventually told, the one with me as the dependent, the stalled, the burden, required them to perform a very specific kind of behavior. And I want you to understand exactly how much they had to forget wrong. The story shifted in small steps. That's how it always starts in families like mine. It starts with a tone. My mother began introducing me to people as Nora, who's been staying with me. Not Nora, who moved home to help me. Not Nora, who's been managing everything. Staying with me, like I was a house guest with a long checkout. Aunt Patricia started referring to my apartment downstairs. I was in a
with my head again.
which I
You had your heart set on
furnished with
me,
my own furniture.
but these feels they come and go.
And when I arrived and found it full of boxes and a mold issue near the water heater, as Patricia started calling it the guest suite. Like my bedroom with the desk I worked at for 9 hours a day was a hospitality accommodation. And Marcus started calling me, without irony, the live-in. He meant it as a joke. He said it with a grin. He was not a
with my head
but
again.
he was a
You
man
had
who
your heart
had never once been
set
asked
on
for a
me,
family grin.
but these
By year
feels they
3,
come and
the word had
go.
changed from
And
live-in to dependent. I heard my mother use it on the phone to Diane. I was in the kitchen, and she was in the living room, and she said, well, with Nora being dependent on me the way she is, I have to be careful about commitments. I stood at the kitchen counter with a mug of coffee I had just poured, and I counted to 12 before I trusted myself to set it down without breaking something. She was not lying out of
with my
malice.
head again.
I want you to
You had your heart
understand.
set
The
on
coolest things in
me,
families are not
but these
usually
feels
done
they
with
come
malice.
and go.
They are done with a deep and genuine conviction that the story you have told yourself long enough becomes the truth. My mother had told herself the story of her generosity for so long. The roof over my head, the room downstairs, the warmth of the family home, that the labor I had provided underneath that generosity had simply reorganized itself in her mind into something I was taking rather than giving.
Messing with my head again. You had your heart
She had a
set
daughter
on
who was not
me,
out there in the world,
but these feels they
evidently
come and
advancing,
go.
evidently achieving in the ways that were visible. And in the cultural framework she had been handed, by her mother, by her church, by the women at the school district who retired alongside her, a daughter who is home and not visibly thriving must be a daughter who is struggling. And a daughter who is struggling must be a daughter who is being carried. I understand the mechanics of it. Understanding it did not come any easier.
You had your heart
The
set
night I knew it had gone too far was a
but these
Thursday in
feels they
February.
come and go. And
My mother was having one of her pressure spikes. Not dangerous. I had learned enough to read the difference, but uncomfortable enough that she was agitated and needed quiet and didn't want to eat what was in the house and sent Marcus to get her food from a restaurant she liked. And while Marcus was out while she was resting and I was downstairs catching up on a contract review I had postponed twice
messing
already
with my
that
head again.
appointment.
You had your heart set on
I could hear her
me,
through the ceiling.
but these feels
The
they
basement
come
ceiling
and
was
go.
not fixed.
And
She said she didn't know how much longer she could manage. She said having someone in the house who wasn't contributing to the household and who couldn't seem to get herself sorted out was a strain she hadn't expected at this stage of her life. She said she had been patient. She said she had been Christian about it. She said she had prayed about it. She said she thought maybe it was time to tell Nora the house needed to breathe.
messing with my head
I said
again.
that sounded
You had your heart
sensible.
set
I sat at my desk with a client contract
these
on my
feels they
screen
come and
others
go.
coming through the
And
ceiling, and I felt something shift in me like a key turning in a lock I hadn't known was there. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Clarity. The next morning, I opened a new spreadsheet. I titled it Actual, and I started filling it in. Not because I planned to use it immediately. Not because I had a strategy. Because I
messing
had
with my
spent 3.5
head
years
again. You had your heart
everything in my head.
set on
Every bill,
me,
every payment, every
but these
appointment,
feels
every
they
repair
come
cost,
and
every
go.
pharmacy
And
argument, every hour of coordinating and managing and quietly absorbing. And I realized for the first time that keeping it in my head served only them. Because things that aren't written down are deniable. Things that aren't written down become someone else's version of events once the truth becomes inconvenient. I was done letting things be deniable. The spreadsheet took me 3 weeks
messing
to
with my
complete,
head
not
again.
because
You had your
I
heart
was slow,
set on
because I had to
me,
reconstruct 4
but
years
these
from
feels they
memory,
come
bank
and
records,
go.
texts,
And
email threads, and the receipts I had kept not out of any foresight, but out of an old habit from my compliance work. I don't throw away financial documentation because I was trained never to throw away financial documentation. When it was done, it ran to 41 rows, 41 line items. Money I had paid directly into the household, repairs I had funded, services I had provided that were cost market rate, administrative and coordination labor I had performed that no one had ever assigned value to because they preferred not to. The monetary total, not counting the labor hours, not counting the freelance income. One had restructured my career around a lower yield model to accommodate the caregiving, not counting 3.5 years of reduced earning capacity, not counting what I had spent on my mother's medical adjacent costs out of pocket. The direct monetary total was $41,000. I stared at that number for a long time. Then I added the labor estimate using a conservative neutral rate for home health aid coordination, household management, and skilled administrative support. I didn't inflate it. I used the lowest defensible numbers. The full figure, conservative estimate, was just under $91,000. $91,000 of invisible contribution in a household where I was the dependent. I did not show anyone this spreadsheet. Not then. I saved it in two places, a secure cloud folder and a USB drive I kept in my car. And then I went upstairs and made my mother her breakfast and drove her to her Thursday appointment and listened to her cardiologist tell her that her numbers were looking significantly more stable than they had been 18 months ago and that whatever she was doing, she should keep doing it. She smiled at the doctor and said she'd been taking better care of herself. The doctor said it showed. I drove her home. The paper under the door was 6 weeks later. I had not forgotten about it. I do not think she believed I had. I think she slid it because she could not say it to my face, which tells you everything you need to know about who understood what had actually been happening in that house. The date she circled was 8 weeks from that Saturday. The house needs to breathe. I picked it up, read it twice, folded it, and put it in the same folder as the spreadsheet. Then I started planning. Not revenge. Not yet. Something more structural. I thought of it as documentation. I was a compliance person. When a system's broken, you don't fix it by yelling at it. You document the deviation. You build the record. And then you make a decision with your eyes open. I did 3 things in the weeks after that paper. First, I notified my freelance clients that I would be transitioning to fully remote independent operations in 8 weeks and that they should expect no disruption in service. 2 of them offered me expanded contracts because they could to have more. Second, I found an apartment, 1 bedroom, reasonable rent, a building with a gym, and a guest parking policy that made it clear you were not running a boarding house out of Unit 4B. Third, I compiled the documents. The medical records, the financial history, the receipts, the bank statements with the relevant transfers highlighted, the calendar I had kept since month 2 of appointments, pharmacy trips, and household visits, the email chain, the text messages, and the spreadsheet, printed cleanly on 37 pages, with a cover page that said Nora Callahan, Household Contribution Record, 2020 to 2024. I put it all in a manila envelope, and I put the manila envelope in my car. And then I waited for the party. I did not know there would be a party. That part surprised me. Even knowing what I knew about my family, even with 4 years of evidence about the depth of their performance, surprised me. But I should have known, because Renata Callahan does not mark the end of things quietly. She marks them with flowers and food and people because witnesses make a moment real to her in a way that private moments never fully do. She needed the audience to believe it the way she was saying it. Without the audience, there was just a piece of notebook paper and a daughter who was leaving, and that was a story she couldn't make beautiful. With 17 people and flowers, it became a celebration of strength, her strength, her patience. Her Christian forbearance in the face of a daughter who hadn't launched. I stood in that doorway with my 11-pound box and I looked at the living room and I thought, she has no idea what is in my car. I said nothing. I took the photo. I left. That night I sat in my new apartment, which was mostly empty boxes and the smell of fresh paint. And I ate takeout. That surprised me more than the party. I thought I would cry. I had cried that basement more times than I will count in this story, because some things are mine to keep. I had cried in my car in the driveway at 11 at night after days that had run 14 hours between my mother and my clients. I had cried in a grocery store parking lot once in March of year 2 because I had just gotten off a phone call with a collections agency negotiating on my mother's behalf while simultaneously getting a text
Messing
from
with my
Marcus
head
asking if there was
again.
anything
You
he
had
could
your
do.
heart set
And it was the
on
combination of
me,
those two things
but this feels
together
like
in
come
that
and
specific
go.
sequence that broke something open. But that night, on the floor of my new apartment, I did not cry. I ate cold pad thai, and I felt something I did not have a word for at the time. I think the closest word is arrived. Like something in me had finally reached the end of a very long drive. Marcus called 11 days later, 8 times before noon. I let the
Messing
first
with
3
my
go.
head again.
I picked
You
up
had
the
your
phone.
heart set on
He
me,
sounded different.
but this feels
Not the
like
mild
come and go. And
Something scraped of its usual surface. I waited. Mama's having a hard time, he said. I said, I know she's having a hard time. I drove her to appointments every week for 3.5 years. I know every hard time she has. Long pause. The medication schedule, he said. I don't know which is which. I thought about the spreadsheet.
messing with my
calendar.
head again.
Laminated
You had your heart
medication
set
card
on me,
taped inside the
but this
cabinet door
feels like
beside
come and
the
go.
sink,
And
color-coded, with the pharmacy numbers at the bottom. Look inside the cabinet beside the sink, I said. Left side, above the counter. There's a laminated sheet. Silence. Rustling. Then a pause. Oh. Then, quietly. Damn, Nora. I said nothing. How long has this been here? Since year 2, I said.
messing
18
with my
months ago,
head
when she
again.
started the
You
new
had your
blood
heart
pressure
set on me,
I was worried about
but this feels like come and
Another
go.
silence.
And
Longer this time. And in that silence, I could feel him looking around that kitchen the way you look at a room after someone explains to you what you were not seeing. Nora, he said, what did you actually do here? I mean, all of it. What did you actually do? And I said, pull up a chair, Marcus. This is going to take a while. I told him everything. Not from anger,
messing with my
from
head
something more
again.
surgical.
You had your
I
heart
had
set
spent 4 years
on
watching my
me,
contribution
but
vanish
this
to a
feels like
narrative that
come
made
and
my mother
go.
large and
And
me small, and I had built the counter record with my own hands, and I was done being quiet about it. I told him about the medical bill, the home equity line, the pension disbursement error, and the 8 months I covered the electric, the car insurance, the grocery bills, the window recalking, the basement renovation, the floor refinishing, the
messing with my
electrical work on
head
the
again.
chandelier
You
that
had your heart
was
set
$100
on
if I
me,
hadn't learned how to do it myself.
but this feels
before the
like
YouTube
come
video
and
at 1 in the
go.
morning.
And
The spreadsheet, the full figure. He was quiet for so long I checked to see if the call had dropped. Then he said, very slowly, $91,000. I said, conservative estimate. He said, and she told everyone you were a dependent. I said, she believed it. That's the part that should scare you, Marcus.
messing with my head
Wasn't
again.
lying.
You had your
She had
heart
told the
set
story so
on
long she
me,
believed it
but this
completely.
feels
He
like
was
come
quiet
and
again.
go.
Then,
And
what are you going to do? I said, I already did it. I left. No, he said, with the documentation, the spreadsheet. I said, nothing right now. I'm not going to court. I'm not making any calls. What I'm going to do is keep it. And if the version of events that was told at that party ever gets repeated to me, to my face, by
messing with
anyone
my
in that
head
family,
again.
the
You had your
spreadsheet
heart
will stop
set
living in an envelope
on me,
in my car.
but
Another
this feels like
silence.
come and
She's
go.
going to need help,
And
he said. I know, I said. She's going to need to build a system that doesn't run on one unpaid person. She's going to need to look at what this actually costs. She's going to need to hire people or reorganize her life to live within what her pension actually provides. These are all solvable problems, Marcus. They're not MY problems. You sound different, he said. I know,
messing with my
she
head
said.
again.
I hung
You
up.
had your heart
I want to slow
set
down here,
on me,
because this is the part
but
where
this
the
feels
story
like
becomes
come and
something
go.
more than
And
just my story. I have thought a lot in the months since about how this happens. How a woman with a master's degree and $41,000 in direct financial contributions and a conservative estimate $91,000 labor record becomes, in the telling of the people she was serving, a freeloader, a dependent, a woman who needed the house to breathe her out. It is not
messing with my
stupidity.
head
It
again.
is not even
You had your heart
most of the
set
time.
on
It is
me,
something more structural,
but this feels
and
like
you have to
come and
understand
go.
structure.
And
will keep being surprised when the version of events that gets told makes you unrecognizable to yourself. Here is the structure. In families with a designated caretaker, and there is almost always a designated caretaker, and it is almost always a woman, and it is almost always the eldest daughter, and it almost always started before she was old enough to have chosen it. The labor is invisible by design, not by conspiracy, but by design. Because if the labor were visible, it would have a value, and if it had a value, it would have a price. And if it had a price, someone would have to pay it. And the entire ecosystem of the family's comfort runs on that labor being free. So the labor becomes love. The sacrifice becomes obligation. The exhausted woman in the basement who drives you to your cardiologist and negotiates your medical debt and makes a laminated medication chart at 2 in the morning becomes
Messing with my head again. You had your heart set on me,
and then a
but these feels they come and go.
reclassification is not personal. It is self-preservation. The family does not decide to erase you. The family simply cannot afford to see you, so over time, the seeing stops. What my mother did at that party was not a betrayal of who I was to her. It was the completion of a process she had been running, without knowing it, for 4 years. She had needed me to be the one who was
Messing
given
with my
something
head
so that she
again.
could remain
You had your
in
heart
the
set on
She had
me,
needed the arrangement to be charity
these
so
feels
that
they
she could
come and
remain the
go.
one in a position
And
of power. And by the time I left, she had succeeded so completely at the story that she threw a party. Sunflowers. The good dress. 17 witnesses. I do not forgive it.
I want to be honest about that.
I am not a redemption arc. I am a woman who did the math and left. But I understand it. And understanding it is how I
Messing with
avoid
my head
letting it happen
again. You had your heart
Patricia
set
called
on
3 weeks after I
me,
left.
but these
She said
feels
she
they
was
come
worried
and
about
go. And
She said Marcus was not cut out for all of this. She said this with the warmth of someone who genuinely believed she was offering something, that maybe Nora honey, it would help everyone if you came back just to get things stabilized again. Just to stabilize things. Just for a little while. Just until things leveled out. There it was. There was the sentence I had been waiting for without knowing I
messing
was
with my
waiting
head
for.
again.
The
You had your heart
request. The request that
set
functions
on
as an
me,
invitation, but is
but these
actually a
feels they
trap door
come
back
and
to the
go.
arrangement that was
And
never named, never valued, never compensated, and never acknowledged. I said, Patricia, do you know what it costs per month to hire a part-time home health aide in Dayton? She said she didn't. I said, about $22 an hour. If you use a licensed agency, it runs closer to 27. 24 hours of assistance per week, which is less than what I was
messing with my
providing.
head
Close to
again.
roughly
You had your heart set on
$112 a
me,
month at the lower
but
end.
these feels they
That's
come
before
and
the
go.
administrative
And
coordination, which is a separate service. That's before medication management, which some aides aren't licensed to perform and requires a different category of hire. That's before the financial management, which is what a bookkeeper or a patient advocate would charge. Patricia was very quiet. I said, I'm not saying any of this to be difficult. I'm saying it because
Messing
when you
with my
ask me to
head
come back
again.
and get
You
things
had your heart
stabilized, I want you to
set on
understand
me,
what stabilized costs.
but these feels
I
they
provided
come
that
and
service
go.
and
And
considerably more for 4 years without payment and was called a dependent at a party with sunflowers at the end of it. I am not coming back to stabilize anything. I'm recommending a home health network and a bookkeeper. I'll send you both links. She said she didn't understand why I had to make everything so complicated. I said, I'm not making anything complicated,
messing with my
Patricia.
head
I'm
again.
making it
You had your
legible.
heart
I
set
sent
on
the links.
me,
The part that wrecked
but
Marcus,
these feels they
and I
come
say
and
wrecked with
go.
care because
And
I watched it happen slowly, and I don't think he has fully put himself back together, was the medication chart. He kept coming back to it. He texted me one night, 2 weeks after the phone call, and said simply, I've been thinking about the chart. I waited. He texted, you made it 18 months ago. For a medication she started 18 months ago. I've been here for 4 years.
messing with my head
Never knew what she was
again. You
taking
had your heart
or
set
when or
on
why.
me,
I texted back,
but these
I
feels
know.
they come
He
and
texted,
go. And
how did I not know any of this? I texted because nobody asked you to. Long pause. Then, that's not an excuse. I texted, no. But it is an explanation. He called me the next day. He asked me to walk him through everything. The medical, the financial, the accounts, the contacts, the vendors,
messing with my
the
head
cardiologist, the
again. You
pharmacist,
had your heart
the home
set
health
on
He
me,
wrote things down this
but these
time.
feels they
I
come
could hear
and
the
go.
pen. At the
And
of it, he said, "Nora, I owe you an apology." I said, "Yes." He waited for more. I didn't give him more. He said, "I know I'm sorry isn't enough." I said, "You're right. It's not. I don't need enough right now. I need you to do what you just did. I need you to know what you didn't know. And I need you to not go back to
Messing
not
with my
knowing."
head
He
again.
said,
You had your heart
I
set
believed him.
on me,
Not completely.
but these feels they
enough to
come
keep the
and
line
go.
open. My
And
mother called in month 2. She had not called in month 1. I think she was waiting for me to call her. I think some part of her expected that I would call, and when I didn't, I think the not calling told her something she had not wanted to know. She sounded smaller on the phone. Not sick. Not in crisis. Just smaller. She said she missed me. I said I heard you.
messing with my
She said
head
she knew
again.
she had done
You had
something
your heart
wrong.
set
I said I
on
know you
me,
did. She said she
but
wanted
these
me to
feels they
understand
come
that she
and
had
go.
totally believed me.
And
She paused here, and her voice caught, and I have thought about that catch more than I want to admit. She had truly believed that she was helping me, that having me home was doing me a favor.
I said, Mom.
You needed me, and I came. That was real, and the help I gave you was real. But the story you told about it, the story you told other people, and more importantly, the story you told yourself, that story
messing with
made
my
me
head again.
And
You
then
had
you
your heart
departed.
set on
Long
me,
silence. She
but
said,
these feels they
"The
come
party
and
was a
go.
mistake."
And
I said, "Yes." She said, "I don't know how it got to that." I said, "I do. You told the story long enough that you believed it. And the people around you needed to believe it too, so nobody pushed back. That's how it gets there." She asked, "Are you coming home?" I said, "No." She asked, "Ever?" I said, "I
messing
will
with my
come
head
and see
again.
you.
You
I
had your
will
heart
be in your
set
life,
on
but I am not
me,
coming home to
but
live.
these feels they
And
come
I am
and
not coming
go.
home to manage
And
anything. If you need care management going forward, I will help you find and coordinate services. I will be your daughter. I will not be your unpaid infrastructure." Very long silence. She said, "That's a hard word. Infrastructure." I said, "It's an accurate word." She said, "I love you, Nora." I said, "I know you do.
messing
I
with my
love you
head
too."
again.
And
You
I
had
meant
your
it.
heart set
That's the most
on
meaningful
me,
part of this kind of story.
but these feels
You
they
can love
come
someone
and go.
completely, and they
And
can still hollow you out. The love is real. The harm is real. Both things are true at the same time, and there is no resolution that makes only one of them exist. I did not cry on that call. I cried after, alone, in the bathroom of my new apartment with the fan on, the way women like me have always cried, privately, efficiently,
messing
and
with
then
my
we washed
head
our
again.
faces and
You
go
had your heart
home.
set
Month
on
4,
me,
Diane published a blog
but these
post.
feels they
I
come
know
and
because
go.
Bethany texted
And
me a screenshot with the message. "I'm so sorry." She tagged your mom. The post was called "When Children Don't Fly," a meditation on loving our struggling adult kids. It did not use my name. It used the phrase a dear friend of mine and described, in careful, Christian, wellness blog language, a woman who had opened her home to an adult daughter.
messing with my head
Saying
again.
that
You had your heart
generosity
set
only
on
to be met
me,
with bitterness when
but
she
these feels
finally,
they come and go.
asked the
And
daughter to take responsibility for her own life. It was read by 412 people. I know because the blog had a public view counter. 412 people read a version of my life that had been laundered through scripture and soft font and came out the other side, looking like a cautionary tale about ingratitude. I read it twice. Then I open my document.
messing with my head again. You had your heart set on me,
$91,000
but these feels they come and
the
go.
receipts.
And
I did not post anything. I did not respond. I forwarded the post to Marcus with one line. "Keep this." He texted back. "Already saved it." I have been asked many times in the months since whether I regret not fighting harder at the time, whether there was a confrontation I should have had earlier, whether the quiet, the 3.5 years
messing
of
with my
absorbing,
head
digesting,
again.
and
You
not
had your
being
heart
allowed,
set
whether that was
on
mistake.
me,
I think
but
about
these
this.
feels they come
Think
and
about it
go.
seriously.
And
Here is what I know. Women in my position are not quiet because they are weak. They are quiet because the family system has designed loudness to backfire. If I had confronted my mother in year 1 about the way she was describing me to people, she would have cried. And her crying would have become the story. And the story would have been that Nora is difficult. Nora doesn't appreciate what
messing with
she's
my head again.
Nora
You
makes
had your heart
everything
set
uncomfortable.
on
The
me,
confrontation would have been
but
turned
these
into
feels they
evidence of
come and
exactly the
go.
narrative meant to correct. So you stay quiet,
And you manage.
and you absorb, and you tell yourself it's temporary, and temporary becomes permanent. And by the time you understand that you are not a visiting helper but a structural support that the whole weight of the house is resting on, it has been 4 years. This is not weakness. This is what it looks like to be trained from
Messing
childhood.
with my head again.
Prioritize the
You had your heart
family's
set
responsibility over your
on
own
me.
survival. This
But
is
this
what it looks
feels
like
like come
every
and
time you
go.
tried to put
And-
meat on the table rearranged itself until your need wasn't on it anymore. The quiet is not a character flaw. The quiet is the symptom. What I did differently was this. I kept the receipts. I built the record. I let the quiet end on my terms, on my timeline, into a life I had prepared before I left. That is the part they don't talk about in
Messing with my
Diane's
head
album.
again. You
They
had your
usually
heart
leave
set
these situations
on
don't
me.
usually leave in a
But this
blaze
feels
of
like come and go.
They leave
And-
quietly. They build something on the side. And then one day the arrangement ends not because they snapped, but because they finished. I was finished. Bethany drove up to see me in month 5. She knocked on my apartment door on a Sunday afternoon with a pan of her mother's cornbread, which was a peace offering from Aunt Patricia, who hadn't worked up the nerve to make it herself. I let her in.
Messing with my
I made
head
coffee.
again. You
We
had
sat
your
at
heart
my
set
table.
on
She said she
me.
wanted to tell me something.
But this feels
She
like
said,
come and go.
I knew.
And
Not everything, but more than I let on. I heard things. I saw things. The cornbread drop is from my mom, but me being here is for me. I said, I know. She said, I didn't say anything because I was afraid of your mother and even more afraid of my own. I said, I know that too. She said, that doesn't make it okay.
messing with my
I said,
head again.
no.
You had your
But it
heart
makes it
set
beautiful.
on
She stayed for
me.
3 hours.
But this feels
We
like
talked
come
about our
and
grandmothers
go.
who had been
And
sisters and what they had built together and what they had passed down, and whether any of the women in our family had ever been taught to ask for what they needed, or whether they had all just learned to provide until they broke. It was the most honest conversation I'd had with a blood relative in years. When she left, she hugged me at the door for a long time. She said, I want to do better. I said,
messing with
"Me
my
too."
head again.
I meant something
You had your heart
different,
set on
but both
me.
versions were true.
But this
My
feels like
mother's
come
numbers
and
were
go.
stable.
And
I know this because Marcus sends me the cardiologist updates now. He made himself her medical point of contact. He asked me to walk him through the insurance portal and the lab result system, and I did in an hour-long video call, and he took notes, and he has not called me with a panic question since, which tells me either everything is fine or he is handling it. I believe it is both. He hired a part-time
messing with my head
3 days a
again.
week.
You had your heart
Named
set
Gerda, who
on
my mother
me.
initially resisted,
But this
and now
feels like
apparently
come and
loves,
go.
because Gerda brings her
And
crossword books and does not allow her to eat after 8 p.m. He restructured the home equity repayment. He addressed the car. He is not doing it perfectly, but he is doing it. It turns out that when you remove the invisible support beam, the people who are leaning on it have 2 choices: find another support beam or learn to hold up their own weight. Marcus chose to learn. That
messing
surprised
with my
me,
head
and
again.
it
You
changed
had your heart
something
set on
between us. Not
me.
everything,
But
but
this
something
feels
real.
like come and go.
My mother mailed me
And
something in month 7. A recipe card. My grandmother's handwriting. The card was for peach cobbler my grandmother made every summer when we visited as children. A specific recipe that my mother always said she'd never written down, but had always meant to. The card had been in a box she found while reorganizing a closet. No letter. No note. Just the card. I
messing with my
sat with it
head
for a long
again.
time.
You had your
Then I
heart
put it on my
set
refrigerator
on
on
me.
Maggie. 2
But
weeks
this
later,
feels
I
like come
called.
and go.
Not about
And
anything specific. Just a call. She answered on the second ring. I could hear she'd been waiting. We talked for 40 minutes. About nothing urgent. About the weather in Dayton and the tomatoes she was trying to grow in a pot on the back porch, and a true crime podcast Marcus had put on her phone that she couldn't stop listening to even though it gave her bad dreams. About my grandmother.
messing with
About
my head again.
She did
You
not
had your heart
apologize in
set
words.
on
I did not
me.
ask her to.
But
At
this
the end,
feels
she
like
said,
come and
I
go.
see things
And
differently now. I said, I know. She said, I don't know if that's enough. I said, it's a start. And I meant that. I want to be careful here, because I am not offering you a redemption arc. I am not here to tell you that everything healed and the sunflowers were forgiven, and my mother became a different woman. She didn't become a different woman.
messing with my
She is the
head
woman she has
again. You
always
had your
been.
heart set
Complicated,
on me.
proud,
But this
occasionally
feels like
capable,
come and
and
go.
slow. frequently incapable of seeing outside the story she has told herself. She did not transform. She shifted.
Slightly.
In the direction of honesty. That is the most I can hold on to. That is the most, sometimes, that any of us get. There is a photo on my phone. My mother in the blue dress. Sunflowers on the credenza. I
Messing with my head again.
17 people
You had your
in
heart
the
set
living room.
on
All of them in the act of celebrating
But
the
these
exit
feels,
of the
they
woman
come and
who
go.
machine gun.
And
I look at it sometimes. Not to hurt myself. Not to maintain the anger. Anger is expensive, and I am careful now about what I fund. I look at it because it is the most honest image I have of how I was seen. And I keep it so I remember what I was willing to do with the truth once I stopped being afraid of it. Nobody in that photo thought they were doing something wrong.
messing with my
That is the
head
most important
again.
thing to
You
me.
had your heart
The
set
people who
on
diminish me
me.
most completely
But these
are
feels,
usually
they
the people
come
who
and
are
go.
most certain of their own
And
righteousness. The cruelty is in the point. The comfort is the point. You are the cost of someone else's comfort, and the story that makes you the dependent, the burden, the one who needed to be pushed from the nest, that story is the cost of their comfort too. Remove yourself, and they don't suddenly feel guilty. They feel inconvenienced. The guilt comes later.
messing with my head again.
And by
You had
then,
your heart
you are already
set
somewhere else.
on me.
You are on the
But
floor
these
of a
feels,
new
they
apartment
come and go.
and feeling something you will not have a word for until later.
Arrived.
I was never the dependent. I was the $41,000 in direct costs. I was the $91,000 in labor. I was the medication chart and the medical bill negotiation and the 8 months of electric bills and the chandelier rewiring and the floor and the windows and the 3.5 years of driving and scheduling.
Messing with my head again. You had your
I
heart
was the person
set
whose presence
on
made the
me.
whole structure possible.
But these feels,
And my
they come
mother's
and
greatest
go.
miscalculation was not throwing the party. It was assuming that the woman she humiliated in front of 17 people and flower arrangements would go far enough to be gone, but not far enough to be free. I went farther. I am free. And the $91,000 is still in the spreadsheet. Still in the cloud. Still on the USB drive in my car. Not because I am planning to
Messing
use
with
it,
my head
but because
again.
the record
You had your
exists,
heart set
because I
on
exist.
me.
Because the
But
version
these
of events
feels,
that
they
was told
come
under
and
those
go.
sunflowers is
And
not the only version. And the world should know that somewhere there is a woman who kept every receipt and made every appointment and paid every gap and held every wall up and smiled through every you're lucky to have such a giving family. And then, one night, she stopped. And she built something for herself.
And it was enough.
It is enough. My name is Nora Callahan.
messing with my
I am
head
34
again.
years old.
You had your heart set
I am done being
on me.
someone else's
But
quiet
these feels,
instructor.
they come
This is
and
the
go.
first time I've said it
And
out loud. It won't be the last.